Hi, hello. Welcome back to True Crime and Crochet with Brie. We are working on a sweater. So, for a lot of years now, I've had this, connection to the MMIP movement, Missing and Murdered Indigenous People. And I've just been engulfed in it, watching the cases roll by. And I figure, you know what? It can't hurt for me to do like a little series, you never know. So anyway, I just want to be a part of the conversation. I want to be a part of the true crime community. And, here we are. So anyway, today we are going to be covering this case, which is one of the cases that has kept me in an absolute chokehold for years now. They have been missing for, I believe, 35 years. I could be wrong. I need to double check that. But they've definitely been missing over 3 decades with not a nothing. Okay. So we're going to be talking about the disappearance of the Jack family. So we're traveling back in time. Come with me. Okay. To a very cold August night in 1989. An Indigenous family of 4 vanished from Prince George, British Columbia. When I say without a trace, literally without a trace. This story, oh my God, this story. So their names are Ronnie Jack, his wife Doreen, and then they have 2 sons, Russell and Ryan. There's been no bodies, no suspects, no real answers. Just a phone call, a promise of a better life, and a void that still haunts the community and their families over 3 decades later. So before they became a mystery, they were just a family trying to get by. Ronnie Jack, 26, was a devoted father and husband. Doreen, also 26 at the time, was known for her very demure personality. She had a very quiet strength and absolutely in love with her boys. They lived in a trailer home in Prince George. They were struggling financially because Ronnie had worked in the logging industry, but he had ended up getting some sort of a back injury. And so they were trying to get by on just, what the Americans would, the equivalent to welfare, and it just wasn't enough. But they were staying together. They weren't letting it rip them apart. They were staying together through these really hard times. Russell was 9, Ryan was just 4, and they were members and natives. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I've tried looking up the pronunciation. I'm probably still going to say it wrong. Tlatsan Nation, a very tight-knit indigenous community in British Columbia. So like a lot of indigenous families in the area, they faced very limited job opportunities, racism, and systemic neglect. But they were hopeful, especially after this opportunity, shall we call it, kind of arose for Ronnie. So on August 1st, 1989, around 11:16 p.m., Ronnie called his brother from a payphone at the First Lube gas station in Prince George, and he sounded really excited. So Ronnie's talking to his brother, and he's telling him that he'd just been offered a job at a ranch or a logging camp near Klukol's Lake. Better yet, Doreen had been offered work as a camp cook there, okay? And they were allowed to bring the kids. He said that a man had offered both of them jobs and a place to stay for the whole family, and the man was even going to pick them up and drive them there. This was the last time anyone heard from the Jack family. Now, here's the thing. Ronnie had been drinking at a bar, okay? Trying to drown his sorrow, supposedly. And in walks this man who ends up telling him about a job. And the thing was that the job had to start the next day, okay? And so Ronnie had actually called his brother at first, trying to see if his brother would mind watching the kids, because the kids had been signed up to start school in a few weeks. And his brother said, "No, I can't, man. Sorry about it." Anyway, so the guy then tells him, "Oh, don't worry about it. There's daycare. There's daycare at this logging camp." And it kind of took Ronnie back, like he was so desperate for this job and for the money, he decided to go along with it, okay? But after the phone call with his brother, Ronnie called his mother and told her what was going on, and she said that he sounded really excited, and it was funky. Like, this type of situation normally doesn't play out at a logging camp, right? Where there's daycare. What? But his mom knew how desperate he was to work. And so she didn't want to bring him down or tell him not to do it or anything, but she had this funny feeling, okay? Now, Here's what's really telling, that Ronnie knew something was up, but it also wasn't a chance he was willing to just pass up. He said to his mother at the end of that phone call, "If I don't come back, come looking for me." Now, Ronnie and Doreen didn't have a car, and so there was no way that they'd be able to get to this logging camp to work by themselves, right? Even with the daycare situation. So the man that Ronnie had met at the bar said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You come with me tonight. Let's head up there right now." And so they left. Now, here's a good example of intuition, all right? This is the guy. This is the suspect. Here's a good example of intuition. Doreen's cousin, who lived next door, I believe, saw the family packing up and getting into the car at 1:30 a.m. And she saw the man and she saw the truck, but something told her, don't approach, don't do it. And so she didn't. And she's literally the last person, aside from this man, to see the Jack family. Now, when Ronnie was recounting where they were going, this whole job thing, to his brother and then to his mother, he didn't mention an exact time frame. He said the job could last 10 days all the way up to 2 weeks. Okay, so the family didn't have an exact timeline of when they would be returning. Okay, and they were going to be obviously at a logging camp. Phone access would probably be very scarce for the next few weeks, right? So even though everybody had a funky feeling and literally was never heard from again, the family didn't know what ranch or logging camp. They also didn't have an exact, like I said, timeline about their return. And so they didn't have a whole lot of information to give to the police. So the family didn't report them missing. They left it for another week, just in case everything was fine, but there was no phone access and they didn't have they didn't want to bother the RCMP, Canada's police, until they could really prove even to themselves that something was desperately wrong. As most of us in the true crime community at this point know, there is systemic racism against any and all Indigenous communities, especially by law enforcement. It doesn't matter if you're in the States. It doesn't matter where you are. Okay, I've seen the same sort of stuff happening in Australia with the Indigenous communities there. Now, the RCMP did open a missing persons file pretty quickly because it was an entire family that had disappeared. But the first efforts, and throughout, I gotta be honest, were incredibly slow, okay? And the Indigenous families, Ronnie and Doreen's families, often reported being dismissed by law enforcement. There was a complete lack of urgency in this case, despite the fact, and this remains true to this day, it was the first case of an entire family disappearing, and they are still the only entire family to have disappeared in Canada. Now, at this point, Doreen's most outspoken sister, Maria, she had actually moved into their house just on the off chance that they happened to return, which, of course, they never did. And to be fair to the RCMP, what they did have to work with was incredibly thin. Whoever this guy is or was either an incredibly lucky criminal, or he had this planned out to the T, which lets me know he's probably done this before and since. So what the investigators had was incredibly thin, right? Ronnie's call to his mother and brother confirmed that somebody had picked them up. People had seen him talking to this man at the bar, but none of the locals had ever seen this man before or since. All the witnesses could really offer in regards to the vehicle was that he drove a dark colored pickup. Again, remember, this is 1 o'clock in the morning, okay? Possibly with a camper. No one at any of the local ranches or logging camps knew anything about job openings, so all of this just didn't make any sense to anybody. There was zero activity on their bank accounts ever since, no confirmed sightings. Like I said in the very beginning, there were no bodies, no vehicle was ever found, and it was as if the family had simply been erased from existence. Now, this also leads us into the infamous Highway of Tears. So Highway 16 in Canada is known as the Highway of Tears, and it's this long stretch of road that is in the middle of nowhere, and it's been linked to, they say dozens, I probably hundreds. It's mostly been attributed to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, but there have been a ton of men that have also disappeared from Highway 16. There have been a couple of suspects, like as the years have gone on, There's been Leland Vincent Switzer, who murdered his own brother in Prince George in 1986, and he's been considered a person of interest in other cases as well. There was also Bobby Jack Fowler, who was active in the area in the 80s and 90s, but no concrete links have ever been made. The only real lead that investigators ever received was in 1996. So essentially, a man was at a party when he called 911, their equivalent of 911. And he called and he spoke to, and there's a recording of it. It is very creepy. And the phone call was literally one sentence. He said to the dispatcher, and it sounds like he's saying, because again, it's muffled, there was a party going on, tons of people there. But it sounds like he says, the Jack family is buried at Sure Ranch. The dispatcher then says, is this in regards to the Jack family? And the guy pauses for a couple of seconds and then he hangs up. That was it. And the RCMP, they pleaded for the man to call back with more information. You can remain anonymous, just help us because we can't make out exactly what ranch you're speaking of. The guy never called back. And of course, they did trace the phone call, but again, it was to a house party and there was tons of people there. And everybody checked out and everybody said, wasn't me, I didn't call. So for decades now, the Jack family's relatives, particularly on Doreen's side, her sisters, they have fought tirelessly for justice. And their story became one of the earliest examples cited in the movement for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, now known as Murdered and Missing Indigenous Peoples. In 2019, on the 30th anniversary of their disappearance, the RCMP, they did come forward and they renewed public appeals for information. They gave out new age progressed images of the children, showing what Russell and Ryan might look like today in their 30s. The case does remain active, but the RCMP has shared very little details on whether any leads have developed. We're guessing that means no, okay? A forensic team was dispatched, to an undisclosed rural location in 2021 based on a tip, but that search has yielded nothing to our knowledge. So let's get into some theories, okay? The main one that comes up a lot is abduction for labor trafficking. Some have speculated that the family was lured under the guise of work, taken elsewhere, and then trafficked out like slaves. Of course, there's always, being unalived by a local predator. Given the pattern of disappearances along Highway 16, this theory has weight, right? The other thing that they looked into pretty extensively was that because the family was struggling so much financially, did they have debts of some kind? But the whole thing about killing off debtors is dead people don't repay their debts. Why would you kill them? The RCMP has also, whenever they've been questioned about, did you guys do this on purpose? Did you mess up this case on purpose? Their whole thing is, well, they bitch, okay? I'm going to call it what it is. They complain. They get pissy because they say, well, the Indigenous communities are not giving us the information that we need. Bro, just do your job, please. And maybe, just maybe, if you invested some resources and time into investing in these relationships with the Indigenous community, maybe then they would trust you. But no, you haven't. So along with this theory of, debts of some kind, right? There, of course, is the theory, was this foul play by someone they knew? But then that doesn't really make sense because while Ronnie was on the phone, he would have said to his mother or brother, hey, I got a job offer from so-and-so. Or, Doreen's cousin, when she was looking out across, she would have recognized the car. She would have recognized the man, but she didn't. And no one at the bar where Ronnie met this dude, no one at that bar had ever seen him, and it was a hotspot for locals. There were some whisperings of possible acquaintances being involved, but nothing was ever concrete, nothing was ever proven. So with no physical evidence at all, everything remains speculation. But the presence of children makes this case so scary, so chilling. Who would target a whole family and why? Why? The only thing that really makes sense is, some sort of a trafficking operation, which is horrific to think about. Today, they still remain missing. They are listed as a missing persons case. There is a $100,000 reward for information, but after 35 years, the community is still waiting for anything. This case, it's not just a haunting mystery. It's a symbol for the wider crisis facing Indigenous communities across North America. It's about loss, yes, absolutely. But this is also about being systemically, and I don't use that word lightly, systemically ignored, systemically dismissed, and forgotten. So if anyone coming across this little video, if you have any information, please, for the love of God, please consider the families. Please consider bringing some closure to this case. Even if it seems like infinitely small, like, you know what, that kind of looks like my uncle, whatever, okay? You can contact the RCMP. You can also contact Crime Stoppers, and you can give them an anonymous tip. You do not have to reveal who you are. Somebody out there knows what happened to the Jack family. Even if it's just a whisper or an inkling, somebody knows. But until that day, until the truth comes to light, we will keep asking, and people will continue to make videos. They will continue to speak out. Maria, Doreen's sister, will never shut up. She will always be screaming from the top of a mountaintop, trying to get attention and help to recover her family. So, for those of us in the true crime community, for those of us who care and are passionate about MMIWP, MMIWG, we will continue to ask questions. We will continue to post videos, and we will be here forever, okay? And we will always be asking the question, what the hell happened to Ronnie, Doreen, Russell, and Jack?